Hello, welcome to the Geography Department. My name is Mr. Brown. I'm the Geography Coordinator. This is my first year here. I've taught for 26 years and I mainly do the human geography topics.
Hello, my name is Miss Hannah. I've been here for a couple of years now. I teach all of the key stages, including Key Stage 5, and I lead on the physical geography topics. And we look forward to having you potentially join us next year.
And this is a brief outline of how the exams work. So paper 1, there is 16 mark essays in about 25 minutes, and you'll have to do a couple, one on coasts and rivers and one on carbon and water, Earth's life support system, which is all about carbon and its importance. So very scientific sort of in terms of Earth life support system in year 13. Rivers and coasts, although physical geography does lend itself to management of disasters as well and management of defences. Paper 2, places and spaces I'll talk to you about in a moment, but it is quite a sort of newish topic that amalgamates population, settlement and economic geography. And we choose migration and power and borders as options for that one. And then in year 13 you do disease dilemmas, and in year 12 hazardous earth, which is 36% actually. It's that paper 3 is very important, and 33 mark essays that you do in approximately 40-45 minutes, so some quite big essays there. And your independent research is worth 20% of your final grade, which you primarily do in the summer holiday, the end of year 12, but we set you up with that in the summer term of year 12. And here, of course, you can pause this and have a look. I mean, this is the outline of how things work in year 12 and 13. There is currently a trip to Dorset with the Federation to look mainly at coasts, but we introduce you to NEAs, the projects that you can do, and it's hoped that we may look at some urban field work as well in London at some stage in year 12 as well. This year there is a trip to Morocco. Next year there will be a trip to Iceland on top of this, and in year 13 we finished the syllabus reasonably early in the spring term and have quite a lot of revision. The deadline for the NEA is by Christmas of year 13, and there is because we have to be careful with time due to it only being 20% of the final mark, so 80% of your final grade is exams. So starting with the first topic, changing spaces, making places. I've been teaching for 26 years now, and this really has, in my time, in the old money as it were, it was population, settlement and economic geography. So it's understanding about the demography, people in a place, the ages, why do certain ethnic groups, different sort of age groups take over parts of cities, and so we look at census data. But it's also looking at globalization and economic changes to cities, so outside forces, so some quite cultural geography. It's almost like sociology in places. So these images of you've got your Hackney hipsters there with the beards. Hackney is a place in London that has changed dramatically, and we look at that, for instance. And there's a bit of historical geography, so how cities have changed from deindustrialization through the sort of 19th, 20th century. And this is something that in your NEA you could look at further and investigate how your part of London has changed. And migration, so we look at the forces of change in cities from different migrant groups taking over. Cities are very dynamic places, aren't they? They're socially changing all the time. Somewhere like Notting Hill, for example, has changed massively. Lewisham is another case in point through migration patterns. And how we perceive cities as well is quite an interesting places. We'll look at census data of deprivation, and we look at health data and life expectancy and education levels, and how cities change through gentrification and re-urbanisation. So it's quite a lot of GCSE themes from settlement, urban futures, but in a lot more detail. And so this becomes a big theme, and this possibly many students go on to study this gentrification. Somewhere like Penge or somewhere like Brixton has seen the rise in more middle class professional groups coming in after artistic groups start the process. So cities are very dynamic. We can measure these by observations and data. So you might want to pause. This topic is very challenging. It's quite social, economic, it's historical. It's looking at lots of data, GIS, for instance, geography information systems, and trying to look at overlays of maps of how places change and how we brand places. So the tourist boards will use places to try and aggressively attract people. And so we almost, like history and like English and sociology media studies, we look at photographs and we try and read the text and the images. So it's a challenging topic. And you can see from the skills there are many projects that students can go on to study about their city and the population change and the economic changes in their cities, even things like crime and perception of crime. And migration becomes another quite large part of time, not as big as the previous topic, but we do spend some weeks looking at migration and obviously linked with globalisation. And so remittances, for example, the second most valuable flow of money to oil, petrodollar, migrants sending money home. And you might want to pause this. These are some of the major themes we look at with global migration, fascinating topic. And obviously a city like London greatly affected by different diasporas, the Irish, Italians, Arabic and Russians, and all sorts of migration diasporas. Power and borders is really geopolitics. So we look at the influence of China, Russia, and things like superpowers and maritime boundaries in places like the South China Sea, our recent issues with the French and fishing, the Cod Wars of the 70s in Iceland. But so as geographers looking at maritime boundaries and how countries' sovereignty, how they try and through soft power, diplomacy and trade influence other countries. So these are some examples of some little case studies of where there is a bit of conflict over where boundaries were put. And the Chagos Islands is a fascinating case study. The British and the Americans sort of were seen to displacing many ethnic indigenous people, and for strategic gain for the military. So we look at it's quite historical, some of this. Power and borders, there we go. You can sort of pause, have a look at some of these. So it's really the politics and geography and globalisation. And in year 13, disease dilemmas becomes a big topic for paper 3. So hazards would have been studied in year 12. And this is looking at pandemics, epidemics. It's looking at health in different countries, how governments manage health. So it links heavily to development, rich and poor countries. And we'll look at different diseases like AIDS or malaria, cholera and tuberculosis, and how different organisations like the World Health Organization or NGOs like Médecins Sans Frontières and individual governments deal with epidemics and pandemics. And we look at some models, epidemiological models of diseases. And including looking at somewhere like London and lifestyle choices and your social economic class and how that can affect your life expectancy and health. So it's a fascinating topic. Lots of social economic links, and we look at different countries and. For example, in African countries, primary healthcare compared to secondary healthcare, the preventative approach against curative approach as geographers. And so this would be some example of different countries, and we would sort of try and analyse, what their big diseases are. Now, obviously, tropical countries have their own challenges of being with their climate, the physical geography, and we look at some diffusion models of Ebola, for example, and SARS, and why that didn't become a full pandemic. So we look at some historical diseases as well, and the management of pandemics particularly. So there we go, you can see some sort of examples of that topic, and the 33 marker essays will come from that list, trying to mitigation. There we go, you can see the future of how we can try and prevent flus and the coronavirus, for example, escalating into bigger death tolls than currently. So that's one of the big themes.
On the physical side of the geography curriculum, what we start doing is, for paper 1, our first topic that we focus on generally is coastal landscapes. This is what we would consider a bit of classical geography, looking at the landscapes, looking at the processes that shape and influence it, and what sort of landforms those create, both here in the UK and in other exemplary areas. For example, the River Nile and the Nile Delta. We also take time to think about the details of what landscape systems are. We look at sediment cells, we look at the forces on and the power of waves through tidal fetches and things like that. We also make sure to spend a lot of time thinking about the human impact on these landscapes as something that is a really important through line through physical geography, this acknowledgement of the links between the physical and the human. So we start to look at, how do people interact with these landscapes? What do we physically do to shape them? Why do we use them? We think about, what are we doing both positively and negatively, and how that's going to change our coastal landscapes in the future. Something very important for us to consider here in the UK, considering our existence as an island nation and the vast amounts of coastline that we have, and how much of our population lives in these areas. One of the areas that we will touch on and focus on as a part of this will be the coastline of Swanage and the surrounding areas of the Isle of Purbeck. Very classical geography here. Swanage Bay, from Old Harry's Rocks down to Lulworth Cove and Durdle Door. And this is where we take students along with the rest of the Harris Federation for a residential field trip, making sure that students understand how we gather data in the real world and how we can then incorporate that into our understanding of the curriculum and of what we're doing. So this is sort of the overview of the exam scheme here, what we would cover, what the examiners would look for, and again, some of those topic-specific skills: observation, measurement and geospatial mapping, data manipulation, thinking about statistics, sediment budget calculations, thinking about what are our inputs to the system versus our outputs, what factors, both natural and human, are influencing them. The next topic from paper 1 that the students will look at will be Earth's life support systems. When it comes to the topic of Earth life support systems, the topic that it's most similar to at GCSE would be sustaining ecosystems and your climate change modules. Earth life support systems combines a lot of different sort of areas of geography, and is one of the ones that really ties into the cutting edge geographical issues of the modern day, being climate change. And we look at this from 2 angles. We look at the water system, and then we look at the carbon cycle as well. We think about how those systems work, what processes drive those systems, where carbon and where are water stored, how do they flow between the different stores within our systems. And then we start to delve into some more specific examples, looking at the differences between the water and carbon systems in the Arctic tundra compared to those in the Amazon rainforest. This helps us get a much wider understanding of how these systems change over time, how they interact with the environment and the climate, and how they then sort of are influenced by human activity. What are we doing to them? What can be done with them going forwards? And again, we've got a lot of transferable skills that we have to have a look at in this topic, specifically involving use of statistical data, mathematical analysis, and then there are also very strong links within this topic to the chemistry that students would study at GCSE and maybe at A level as well. The final topic that I will be covering with the students is the second major topic of their third paper, their hazardous earth. Hazardous Earth builds on the foundation of tectonic hazards from their GCSE and examines these hazards in far greater detail than students will have done before. From the structure of the Earth, to the forces that are moving the Earth's crust under our feet, to the hazards themselves and the landforms they've created and how they've shaped our planet for over 3 billion years. We delve into that and we look at the past, we look at what it's like living with these hazards in the present, and then we also start to think about what will happen with these hazards in the future. Our primary focus here is volcanoes and earthquakes, and students are given the opportunity to examine places around the world to help them with that understanding. We look at a wide variety of case studies from all around the world, both from developed, advanced countries to EDCs to LIDCs. We think about the impact of economic development and spatial location on the effects and the risk posed by these hazards. We think about why do people take the risks? Why do people live in areas with these hazards? And then we delve into risk management. We look at the risk equation. We look at techniques used to help find and sort of reduce the impacts of that. Obviously, alongside the